Welcome to Happy Health Podcast, where we explore alternative modalities in healing, well-being, and graceful aging. I am your host, Rita Rivera, teacher of the Alexander Technique and also the creator of Your Brilliant Back 28-Day Posture Challenge. And my guest today is Susann Suprenant, body-mind coach that guides clients through chronic pain recovery. So join me in my conversation with Susann. So good morning, Susann. I'm so thrilled to have you on the Happy Health Podcast this morning.
Good morning. Thanks for having me, Rita.
Yeah, I love your background. I have a passion, of course, for the arts, still being in the dance world, and you've been in the theater world. And also, I'm so interested to hear about your journey, because one of the things I focus on a little bit with the Happy Health Podcast with some of my guests is this whole issue of chronic pain. Such a huge issue, and it actually catapulted me into creating my own program, as you know, the Your Brilliant Back program.
Yeah.
So I want to start off with hearing your story and what led you into alternative modalities.
Yeah. Well, I am a theater artist. So my background for the past number of decades, 30 plus years, I've worked as a theater professor, teacher of movement, and professional director. So that's always at some level what I do.
Yes.
And my work as a teacher led me into administration, which was, a lovely way to serve as well. And it wasn't what I wanted to do forever and ever. And so at the point where my kids were all grown, then it was like, this Feldenkrais business that I learned as an undergraduate in my theater classes, that made such an impact on me, and that I've used all the way through my, all of my teaching, all of my directing, all of my performance composing, all of the way that I, lead groups, all of it just infused my work.
Fantastic.
I would like to go back and actually get that certification. And so I basically took an early retirement and focused more on some group coaching and things like that.
Oftentimes when people are led to alternative therapies, they have some issues, physical issues in their own bodies. So it sounded like what was triggered was more of a somatic, emotional component, something you had experienced that gave you pleasure, gave you some relief, that you decided.
Yeah, I would say that working with actors, and I also do choreography for non-dancers, basically. It's just really becoming aware of, I don't know, we use terms like, in your body or not in your body. Well, okay, first of all, that has to be metaphorical because clearly here we are in our bodies, but just really over the years getting a sense for people who felt to me like they were inhabiting their own skin, and what was that, and how to help actors who were, we use terms like all in their head. Again, this can't be true literally, but we know what that means somehow. And finding that with modalities such as the Feldenkrais method and other really just mindfulness somatic approaches, that people who would come into a greater awareness, just a sense of how they moved and feeling comfortable with themselves, they could do fantastic, amazing, creative things. That there was only glimmers of it initially. And so, so the fact that I had chronic pain throughout all of this was just something that I set aside, and wasn't that just too bad? Right. And so I I did not come to the Feldenkrais method for any concerns about chronic pain. I came to it because of the creative awareness, the creativity that I saw people blossom into when they're awareness of themselves.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
fantastic. So you then decided, you took an early retirement, and then you decided to go and do the training. And it wasn't really the
Yes.
chronic pain that led you to that. It was just more of a blossoming, more of an opening, more that you wanted to feel within your body.
Yeah, and that I felt like I could better serve the actors, the movers, the dancers that I was already working with.
Right.
And I had already started shifting into coaching, creativity coaching, and doing a lot of group coaching for helping mostly like empty nester women, primarily women, who had put a whole lot of time and energy into other folks' creativity, basically. And then they're like, I used to write poetry when I was a 7th grader and it was awful, but where is that person in me, you know?
Right, exactly. So we've
And
mentioned the Feldenkrais work a few times, and I definitely want to get into your work now dealing with chronic pain issues.
yes,
But I would love for you to say a little bit about the Feldenkrais for people that have never heard about it
right,
before, to
right.
inform them a
Yes.
little bit about what that is.
Smart, yes. Well, the method, the Feldenkrais method, is named for Moshe Feldenkrais, and Moshe Feldenkrais was a physicist, a structural engineer, a science guy,
Yeah.
who also was very physically inclined. Was a judo master and all sorts of things, but a soccer injury when he was younger came back to haunt him in his 40s, and his prognosis was really dire. And long story short, instead of the surgeries that seemed pretty hopeless or the wheelchair that seemed inevitable, he thought, I'm a smart guy, I should just figure out how my body works and see if I can like use it better. And so, you know, you obviously know so much about the Alexander technique. Besides his judo, he looked at modalities like the Alexander technique, and then a lot of developmental, like infant development, and and learned that he could communicate that to other people through group classes and hands-on work in ways that brought so much ease and comfort, and ultimately, helped people with chronic pain.
And so there are two components to the Feldenkrais work. Is that correct? Because one is private work where you work privately with people, which you do here in Santa Cruz. And the other is you do group classes, or there's something called awareness through movement. Is that correct?
Right, right. The group classes are led verbally, so you don't instruct by showing the pose, because the idea is you want people to really sense in themselves what feels not correct, but what feels right, what feels interesting. The Feldenkrais method in a nutshell is really a method of inquiry.
Yeah.
It's self-inquiry and really heightening your senses to sense yourself.
Yeah, that's beautifully stated. So somewhere along this line here, you decided to, I want to hear about the transition from the Feldenkrais world and moving into dealing with people who have chronic pain, and to hear about this modality that you have trained in and that you teach.
Yes.
How did that come about?
Oh my gosh. You know, it was a convergence of forces that really like sort of insisted that I find my path. I think it was one of those things where I just, after enough things add up, you just can't ignore it any longer. I think I said I was doing some group coaching with creativity, and I was including some Feldenkrais awareness through movement sequences in that, and a lot of journaling with these women. And at the end of one of the 3-month sessions, this woman said to me, you know, just so thankful that her migraines were gone. And I was like, oh, that's Awesome. I mean, I was wondering, oh, did she change her meds, or like, what did she do? And she attributed it to the sort of journaling and self-reflection and gentle movement that we did. And I was like, awesome, I'll take that. That certainly wasn't how I marketed the course, but, put that aside. Also, in the midst of my training, I had a whole series of life events, a period where just like a whole number of people who were close in my life and my family died. Some really just a tumultuous time where it was, tragedy was gripping me, I will say. And during that time, I was also displaced from my home. It was just, I don't even want to go into all that. It was one of those times, right? It all came in a very short period. And I actually had an injury during that time in my shoulder. And I was dog walking, and my dog just took off, which he never does. It's just one thing after another. And I ended up with such a painful shoulder. If I rolled over on it at night, it would wake me up screaming in pain. Right. And it turned into a frozen shoulder and just all of it. And it came after all the treatments and this and that. I got super insulted and extremely bothered by someone who helped me put some a little 2 and 2 together about the trauma that I was experiencing, because some of it was just sadness that is a part of life, and then there was actually some really difficult stuff that was that I needed help with, I'll say. And that had paired with this injury, and it was really working through the emotional component of that trauma that released the shoulder. And I was like, okay, that's weird, because I was just so new to this chronic pain world. And then there were 2 or 3 other incidences that these things all happened basically at the same time. Things related to my father's death and how that occurred. Just some medication that he was prescribed that he should not have been, and had never taken meds, and he had a chronic pain issue. That all kinds of stuff, when you're packing up your parents' effects, you learn things. So let's just say, long story short, a whole series of events converged for me to make an aha that there was something more about this chronic pain that had an emotional component that I had no idea about. And that led me to get trained with some of the folks who are at the top of their field right now, this new pain science, really. I was trained by Dr. Howard Schubiner and Alan Gordon, and they, along with a couple of other researchers, are sort of at the vanguard of this.
What is the name of that modality?
It isn't a modality as much as an approach, I guess. Different folks have come up with different names. In Australia, the primary researchers are David Butler and Laura Mosley, and their work is called Explain Pain. And Howard Schubiner's work is, they call it Unlearn Pain. And with Alan Gordon, he's put a whole protocol together on something called the TMS Wiki. And all of this is growing out of something that used to be called TMS. There was a doctor, some people have heard of him, Dr. John Sarno, who wrote a number of books, healing back pain, etc. And if you go on Amazon and you look at the reviews for books like Healing Back Pain, it's just like, what are you saying? People are like, I had this, chronic sciatica and I couldn't sit and my life was over, and I read this book and I got better. And you're like, this is some kind of craziness. Who's writing these reviews? But they're endless. And as it ends up, Dr. Sarno was on to something. His books, if you look back now, they're rather quaint. There's some misunderstandings and some leaps maybe, but the science is catching up now to understand basically that if you take pain science education and some reflective practices and some graded exposure to reduce the fear of movement, then people can recover from chronic pain.
Yeah. So
What all of those are coming to.
So the doctors and the scientists that you have just mentioned, so
Mhm.
and the modality that you are teaching and practicing,
Mhm.
is it mostly emotional based? So that is the way into unwinding
Yeah.
pattern of chronic pain is through emotions.
Yes. I mean, I hesitate to say yes because it really is a three-part um, combination.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, someone could be working with a therapist and having a really important therapeutic connection where they are healing trauma, etc. But it might not be addressing their pain because they're not making a direct correlation. The pain science education is critical, and some folks go as far as to say that is the absolute essential, and the others are just help.
Can you give us something about the pain science,
Yeah,
something simple
yeah,
that we can maybe bite into?
right. The simplest way, after a sip, sorry. Mm. I would say the simplest way that I've come to understand it, and first of all, I just want the caveat would be this is an extremely complex
Yeah.
topic with that people are learning with brain research, etc. But in the simplest form, the way I understood pain and the way I feel like most people have understood pain up to this point is that pain is directly correlated to damage. So that if I get a paper cut and I go, ow, I can see there's a little line there and it hurts, pain equals damage. That is very close, if not completely true, with acute pain. But it doesn't hold true for persistent pain that keeps recurring or that stays after a 3 to 6 month natural healing period. And so, what neuroscience and and pain researchers have determined is that pain is the way that our body registers danger, not damage.
Hmm.
And that critical difference,
Hmm.
so those two things can still line up.
Right.
So
Mm-hmm.
if when we're talking about acute pain, so if
Mm-hmm. Right.
you feel pain and there is structural damage,
Right.
well then yes,
Yeah.
you're registering that is dangerous, and you'd better take your hand away from that hot stove, or you better get off of that sprained ankle, etc. But after the natural healing period, if it continues to be painful, it's what we now call neural pathway pain.
Mm-hmm.
So that if we think metaphorically, if there's like a groove in the road, that's the way the rain's going to trickle down. It's already been well worn.
Right.
And so if we have a neural pathway that each time we sense danger, it triggers pain,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
then we can be in the grips of actual, real, debilitating, very serious pain.
Mm-hmm.
It's not, quote, in our heads. It's very real, but
Right.
it isn't related to structural damage.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing that has been remarkable for so many people, and there are even some back surgeons, specifically one famously, Dr. David Hanscom, who've given up back surgery and have just started, they're like, I'm going to proselytize this work instead.
Right.
Because the disc degeneration and the what people would call bulging discs, all those kinds of things that people show on their MRIs and their other imaging, as it turns out, those are normal abnormalities and they don't correlate to pain.
Mm-hmm.
So if someone goes in to some sort of doctor and has some kind of an image of their back and they're shown, oh, look at this difficulty, L4, L5, et cetera, and they're having pain, they can imagine that those are the same things. But the percentage of people with no pain who also have those same abnormalities
Right.
is so high that back surgeons now are saying, oh, we
Right.
can't in good conscience continue this way.
Fascinating insights and conversation really is. So can you give me an idea of, if someone comes to you that has unexplained back pain,
Right.
how would you approach working with them inside of this technique or modality?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you for that question. Very first of all, there are some things that would need to be ruled out. I'm not a doctor, and so I would ensure before we work together that they had ruled out fractures, tumors, infections, those kinds of things, and that's critical. And we would do a long intake so that I would look at a lot of their self-care and things. I've got a particular self-care intake, so the things that they might not even put into that category, we would take a look at. We would also, I do some sort of creative work at helping them articulate their values. And that ends up being critical in our work together, or pivotal, I guess I would say. And then lastly, some personality, looking at some of the personality traits that tend to lead people to chronic pain more often. Right. So we find that perfectionism and goodism or people pleasing are two of the highest indicators for people who will develop chronic pain.
That's fascinating. That's really fascinating.
Yeah, that's my key in, really. If I find, especially, and there's also, I would say another, I think probably the most dramatic correlation that people find between, say, personality issues and chronic pain would be the ACE scores, the adverse childhood events. So the over 4, you have a much higher incidence of illness and chronic pain, and an ACE score over 7, then it's very difficult to navigate without. And it's really about that danger. So when your nervous system is hypervigilant and has read correctly that the environment holds many dangers, you will be primed to experience pain more readily.
But those are you're talking about unconscious dangers. Is that correct?
Right. I mean, if as a child you had an unsafe environment, then you learned to be on the lookout.
Right.
And you also learned to brace and to numb. And so, you asked about the connection between, emotional, like accessing emotions, basically, and relieving chronic pain. Some people want to boil it all down to anger and say it is anger that leads to chronic pain. And others say, we're more complex than that, and sometimes that anger is covering up fear or grief, etc. And I like to work with people more individually, and in some ways, it's not that important to me what they uncover. I give them lots and lots of journaling prompts that are designed based on the intake of values and self-care and personality. And then those prompts that they work through are not for me. So it's not a therapy situation where then they bring that to me, and it's that therapeutic relationship where I, yes, how do you feel today?
Right. Is the work that you do hands-on with them at all?
It can be, but I would say I'm just flashing through different instances. Sometimes it starts with hands-on because they come to me for a Feldenkrais functional integration one-on-one session. And then we work into the chronic pain coaching. And so we've already established that that is a modality that's helpful to them. But there's kinesiophobia. I mean, there are people who are like, it's touching or movement that is triggering the fear.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
So I don't go in with, it's graded exposure in that case.
Right.
So
Well,
that they can turn down the danger signal.
right. I'm just
So.
fascinated with the conversation around chronic pain issues because it's so prevalent in our society, and really, I would say the world. So very,
Prevalent.
very interesting. And I know that you have information. We're kind of running to the end of our time.
Yeah,
And
that's right.
I know so much to talk about. So, but I know you have information on your website that will be on the Happy Health podcast site. And I wonder if you would like to leave us with any closing thoughts or any pearls of wisdom to someone who is dealing with chronic pain.
Oh gosh, yes. I would say, I've got to quote Moshe Feldenkrais, I suppose, when he says that there's nothing permanent about our behavior other than our belief that it is so.
Beautiful. I love that very much. And I'm also very interested to read a little bit about this process that you're in around chronic pain. So is there anything that you would recommend reading wise? Is there a book out or?
I would recommend the Curable app for people who are phone app savvy. I facilitate groups for them as part of a new program there, and I really recommend their app. It's just inspiring the way that it's helped people.
Okay, great.
And then I would say, it's called Curable, and you can find it, like on any app store or curablehealth.com. And then also Dr. Howard Schubiner's book, Unlearn Your Pain.
Okay.
And he has a companion for another conversation, but he has a companion book, Unlearn Your Anxiety and Depression, because as it ends up, the two are closely related.
Yes, that would make sense. But you've just been such a joy to have on the program. And thank you so much.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I really appreciate the time.
All right. Yeah. Well, have a fabulous rest of the day. And thank you so much for the work that you're bringing out into the world.
Oh my gosh. And same to you. I really appreciate that you're doing this to get the word out for folks. It's wonderful. Thank you.
All right.
Yeah.
Bye.
Great. Bye-bye.